Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support, rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Peter Lee is here with us today, and we talk about the Fiasco in Alaska, aka the Alaska Summit talks between the U.S. and China on March 18th, where Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with top Chinese diplomats, including Yang Jiechi, the director of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission office in China. The preaching by the American officials was met with an unexpected clapback, and the whole affair blew up in international media, including in Chinese social media, where the Chinese translator, Zhang Jing, and the defiant message she relayed was widely celebrated. We also talk about the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's containment strategy for China, a multifaceted Cold War on the rise, the situation with Taiwan, Project 2049, and the prospects for war between Taiwan and China. In a bonus episode, Peter explains the Who Lost China narrative that has influenced military and diplomatic corps for decades. And before we begin the interview, I'll include some excerpts, a long excerpt, of the Chinese response to Blinken from the Fiasco in Alaska. We recorded this on March 31st, 2021.
China's per capita GDP is only 1/6 of that of the United States, but we have managed to end absolute poverty for all people in China. And we hope that other countries, especially the advanced countries, will make similar efforts in this regard. The Chinese people are closely rallying around the Communist Party of China. Our values are the same as the common values of humanity. Those are peace, development, fairness, justice, freedom, and democracy. What China and the international community follow or uphold is the United Nations-centered international system and the international order underpinned by international law, not what is advocated by a small number of countries of the so-called rules-based international order. And the United States has its styled United States-style democracy, and China has the Chinese-styled democracy. It is not just up to the American people, but also the people of the world to evaluate how the United States has done in advancing its own democracy. In China's case, after decades of reform and opening up, we have come a long way in various fields. In particular, we have made tireless efforts to contribute to the peace and the development of the world and to upholding the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. The wars in this world are launched by some other countries, which have resulted in massive casualties. But for China, what we have asked for other countries is to follow a path of peaceful development. And this is the purpose of our foreign policy. We do not believe in invading through the use of force or to topple other regimes through various means or to massacre the people of other countries, because all of those would only cause turmoil and instability in this world. And at the end of the day, all of those would not serve the United States well. So we believe that it is important for the United States to change its own image and to stop advancing its own democracy in the rest of the world. Many people within the United States actually have little confidence in the democracy of the United States, and they have various views regarding the government of the United States. In China, according to opinion polls, the leaders of China have the wide support of the Chinese people. So No attempt to.
美国的民调
The opinion polls conducted in the United States show that the leaders of China have the support of the Chinese people. No attempt to smear China's social system would get anywhere. Facts have shown that such practices would only lead the Chinese people to rally more closely around the Communist Party of China and work steadily towards the goals that we have set for ourselves. There are many things that we can do together and where our interests converge. So what we need to do is to abandon the Cold War mentality and the zero-sum game approach. We must change the way we think and make sure that in this century, the 21st century, countries, big or small, particularly the big countries, should come united together to contribute to the future of humanity and build a community with a shared future for humankind. It's also important for all of us to come together to build a new type of international relations featuring fairness, justice, and mutual respect. And on some regional issues, I think the problem is that the United States has exercised long-arm jurisdiction and suppression and overstretched the national security through the use of force or financial hegemony. For Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan, they are inalienable part of China's territory. China is firmly opposed to U.S. interference in China's internal affairs. We have expressed our staunch opposition to such interference, and we will take firm actions in response. On human rights, we hope that the United States will do better on human rights. China has made steady progress in human rights, and the fact is that there are many problems within the United States regarding human rights, which is admitted by the U.S. itself as well. The United States has also said that countries can't rely on force in today's world to resolve the challenges we face. And it is a failure to use various means to topple the so-called authoritarian states. And the challenges facing the United States in human rights are deep-seated. They did not just emerge over the past 4 years, such as Black Lives Matter. It did not come up only recently. So we do hope that for our two countries, it's important that we manage our respective affairs well, instead of deflecting the blame on somebody else in this world. And for China, we will manage our own affairs well, and we hope to deliver a better life for our 1.4 billion Chinese people. This is the goal of China's diplomacy. And also, we will make our contribution to the peace and stability of the world.
美国不代表国际舆论。
The United States itself does not represent international public opinion.
西方也不代表国际舆论。
And neither does the Western world.
无论是从人数上来讲，还是从世界潮流来讲，西方的舆论不能被认为是国际舆论。
Whether judged by population scale or the trend of the world, the Western world does not represent the global public opinion.
所以，我们希望美国在讲什么普世价值啊，什么国际舆论的时候啊，想想自己啊心里是不是踏实？因为你们不能够代表，你们只能代表美国政府。
So we hope that when talking about universal values or international public opinion on the part of the United States, we hope the U.S. side will think about whether it feels reassured saying those things, because the U.S. does not represent the world, it only represents the government of the United States.
我认为世界上绝大部分国家不承认美国所说的普遍价值， 不承认美国的言论就是国际舆论，不承认少数人制定的规则就是所谓以规则为基础的国际秩序。
I don't think the overwhelming majority of countries in the world would recognize that the universal values advocated by the United States or that the opinion of the United States could represent international public opinion. And those countries would not recognize that the rules made by a small number of people would serve as the basis for the international order.
Welcome to Round the Empire. With us today is Peter Lee. Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for coming back on the show. It's great to see you again.
Hi, Joanne. It's great to be here.
So Peter has a show on Patreon called the China Threat Report. And he's also kind of my go-to guy, or at least one of the people that I always go to with questions about China. And this time when the Alaska summit happened and when I saw some of the reporting from it, I immediately messaged him and said, I need to talk to you. What the heck just happened? Mm-hmm. Right, Peter? So
that's right.
and I've been talking to we've been talking about it in the Discord channel, Discord server that we have for Around the Empire podcast. And we're all pretty interested in the topic. So I just wanted to go over that with you a little bit, get your thoughts on that. And what the heck you think happened.
What happened?
Yeah. Yeah. And you do a lot of reporting on Taiwan, which I'm particularly interested in, worried about. And then we're also going to ask Peter for a little bit more historical context in the bonus question about the whole who lost China thing that has been around for decades now, and which seems to pop up again in conversations, particularly with war and foreign policy people. And I just wanted to dig a little deeper into that about what that's about, but that will be at the end for patrons. So Peter, what the heck happened at that Alaska summit?
What happened at the Fiasco in Alaska?
Fiasco.
Yeah. Well, I think it was pretty much preordained. You know, I did not expect anything other than that to happen. I don't know if I was in the minority on that. I don't think I was. Basically, the Biden administration is in its empty posturing phase when it comes to China. And when they went to Alaska, the basic thing was don't look weak, you know, and stand up for our allies. That's the main theme of the Biden administration, as while Trump was unilateral and alienating our allies while he alienated China, the Biden administration is going to go the other way. It's going to be ostentatious in its unity for and support of its allies and expect to get the same in return. And from the Chinese point of view, this is an escalation because previously, I think they rather enjoyed the Trump years because there's Trump making a fool out of himself on the international stage, dismaying his allies and making it easier for China to basically keep things in a holding pattern with the countries that are hostile to it.
Yeah, but here easy for them to look good during the Trump.
Yeah. And so when Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, comes in and says, we're going to basically maintain all of Trump's policies. There, other than rejoining the WHO, I haven't seen anything that really represents a rollback of Trump policies. He's kept the tariffs. He's kept the Uyghur genocide designation. He's kept the posture towards Taiwan. He's kept the designation of Hong Kong as having failed in its autonomous role. So anyway, he comes to Alaska, and he's going to sit down there and basically tell the Chinese, that the grown-ups are back in charge, and you're just going to have to suck it up and accept that America and its allies are once again your big daddy. And so that makes the Chinese go crazy. And also they saw as a matter of tactics, they're going to go in there and they want to make Blinken look like, instead of controlling events, He is being controlled by events. So there was this very staged encounter where they're going to do the 2-minute yapping at the beginning before they go in there and sit down in this seedy hotel in Alaska. And Yang Jiechi, the state council guy who's in charge of foreign affairs, he goes off on this long rant, about China's rights and human rights and all that sort of stuff. And so the whole thing was primed to blow up, in Chinese media and, social media and all that stuff. So, he had his tagline, which was, you cannot talk to China from a position of strength, which wasn't translated very well. But what he really meant was that the United States no longer has the global standing as the leader of the entire world to go in there and tell China that China's approach to governance, international affairs is wrong.
It's a pretty big deal.
It was a big deal, and the Chinese kind of enjoyed it. The social media was given free rein, and everybody's been jumping on. A couple days ago, as part of the whole, we're not getting pushed around by Tony Blinken in the West thing. One ambassador, he called Justin Trudeau a running dog. And the ambassador to France called a critic of his over there a little thug.
When did that happen? After the summit? Before?
After the summit. So, there was this whole thing where China wouldn't be pushed around, cowabunga, that kind of thing. By the way, I should point out one of the funny things was that, of course, this so-called summit was held in a crappy hotel in Alaska.
With no meal before it.
What's that?
With no meal, they didn't give them any meals or anything to eat. And the Chinese filmed, I think I saw it in the CGTN YouTube channel, just a small clip of somebody saying, hey, to the foreign minister, hey, did you have any lunch? And he said, I had instant noodles.
Noodles, yes. Well, and then the Americans come back. They could have had a real meal. They just didn't want to have a real meal. But the point was that this has always been one of the brainwaves, particularly among, China watchers, sort of the Prague hockey kind of China walkers, is that what China really craves is getting the legitimacy of a visit to Washington, or even better, having the Americans go to Beijing. And so what happened was that Blinken and was it Lloyd Easton, the Secretary of Defense, they went to Japan, they went to Korea, but instead of flying 1 hour across the water to Beijing, they went back to Alaska and forced the Chinese to come to us. And they admitted that was a conscious decision to show the Chinese who was boss. So, the Chinese knew what this was about, and they knew what they wanted to say. And so we're getting a lot of rather extravagant kabuki as a result, with T-shirts, and celebratory noodle eating and that sort of thing.
The T-shirts are on the Chinese side, right? I haven't seen anything here.
I haven't seen anything on the United States
side.
Okay,
no. So this is a topic that was pretty interesting to the people, some listeners of the show, supporters. And we were watching, it was like, what's going on? And they provided some great information for me about some of the translation issues, oddities, particularly the translator on the American side. There were some significant things left out. I don't know if I could say mischaracter, maybe poorly characterized in such a way that certain points that should have come across in English wouldn't come across in Chinese. I think that the person who talked to me about this said that the Chinese translator, who became a rock star after that, the woman, that her translation was fairly good. It was pretty accurate as to what the person she was translating had said. But on the American side, not so much.
I wouldn't be surprised. I have not listened to the actual footage from that thing, but as I said, this was both sides acting out, and so afterwards there are going to be some real meetings between real people, and hopefully with real translators. But what I think the basic dynamic of U.S.-China relations right now is that China doing anything positive about China or with China is not a priority for the Biden administration. They've, the basic approach, I think, for Biden and company is, COVID relief, winning the midterms, and not looking weak on foreign policy, because that's always been a rap on the Democrats in general and Obama and Biden in particular. And that's the context that he's working off of there. So, he's basically, so Tony Blinken's, they got this brainwave. They said, we're going to go out there, we're going to talk tough. And then we're just going to let things stew for a while and, let the Chinese come to us. We're not going to invest any political capital in trying to improve relations with China, which quite frankly, in the current environment makes sense. We're basically approaching them as an adversary, and anything that makes them less adversarial actually provides less justification, not only for the defense buildup and giving Indo-PACOM whatever they want in terms of $27 billion of new spending. I think that was the number. The other thing is that Joe Biden, he's using the China threat to justify his domestic infrastructure and industrial policy things. So it's not
really?
like I'm not giving away the store to the liberals. We got to beat China in the economic sphere, So, basically, anti-China hostility is baked in, and that's why, we do what we do. And probably that's why, more and more Asians are getting beaten up on the street, because, we've otherified them. We've objectified them as the enemy. We want to keep them as the enemy because we have trillions of dollars of economic interests riding on keeping this narrative going. And so, maybe a higher level of violence against Asian people is just collateral damage of this whole initiative, which is supposed to keep America on top in Asia and around the world.
Now, the Build Back Better thing. I know. Well, that comes from the Davos. That's where that originated, the Great Reset thing. But the Biden and Obama have never had any interest in building back industrially, which I personally agree. I think it's an important thing. I think having your biggest adversary provide some enormous percentage of your goods is kind of a really bad idea. So it's become a little bit of a mix. The infrastructure, I think, is lots more roads. There's a green nature of this one. It's a lot of big contracts handed out to a lot of cronies. I don't think it has a lot to do with industrial, to rebuild our industrial sector, but it's interesting that that's being brought into it. I hadn't heard that.
Well, there's the whole cataract of pork issue. Maybe when we talk about Taiwan, we can talk about Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC. But one of the bills that's winding its way through Congress now is one that's very close to the heart of Chuck Schumer, which is saying that we can no longer rely on either Taiwan or China in the electronics sphere. America has to be self-sufficient in semiconductor manufacturing. And it happens that there are a couple reasonably sized plants. One of them's IBM, one of them's an independent in upstate New York. And so the idea is that when we build back better, we will also be pumping money into these facilities.
Well, I personally would be happy to see them pump money into us being able to build things again, at least to be somewhat self-sustaining. I don't know how many countries are actually fully self-sustaining, but that would be news to me that this current Democratic leadership had any interest in doing that. Their line for the past at least decade has been, look, guys, those jobs are never coming back. Okay. They're never coming back. And they were totally into the financialization of our economy. So, I don't know if we're going to give them a pass now and say, oh, well, they just got bad intelligence, or they were just, they just didn't realize that when you give away all of your manufacturing, it's going to cause some national defense issues. But the whole thing about Democrats, have to prove that they're not weak. That's wearing awfully thin. That's really wearing thin. I don't know. Democratic presidents are pretty big warmongers nowadays, and everyone knows it. I don't
Well,
know
it's
what
kind
they
of
have to
worn thin
prove.
with me, but I
Yeah, I
think
know.
that, but one of the interesting things I wrote about on my Patreon was the backstory of Joe Biden and the Secretary of Defense spot, and
Lloyd Austin. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I don't know if anybody remembers Chuck Hagel anymore. Anybody remember Chuck Hagel?
I do.
You know, Chuck Hagel had a short and inglorious career as Secretary of Defense under Obama. And that was when Obama was, trying to get his own sort of peacenik or, non, military industrial
Interventionist. Yeah.
complex thing on. And Chuck Hagel was put in there. He was supposed to bring troops back from Afghanistan and all that stuff. Anyway, he got totally chewed up and by the China hawks in the Department of Defense. He was pushed out. The relatively conciliatory guy who was running PACOM, Pacific Command, he got pushed out. And instead we got Ash Carter as Secretary of Defense. And he was the guy who was, gung-ho for developing India as a strategic counterweight. And so during the tail end of the Obama administration, it was said, Asia policy is not run by John Kerry. It's not run by Barack Obama. It is run by Ash Carter out of the Pentagon. And the other context is that Chuck Hagel was really, really close to Joe Biden. Joe Biden fought for him to get that job. And it was Joe Biden who was getting hosed by the hawks at the Pentagon when they pushed Hagel out and brought in Ash Carter. And so I don't know if you remember that Michelle Flournoy.
I do.
Michelle Flournoy was, everybody was saying, it's going to be Michelle, man, woman Secretary of Defense, super capable, but Biden didn't pick her. And the reason, I think, was that at the tail end of the Obama administration, she was put on the short list to replace Chuck Hagel, but she refused. She said, take my name off the list. And she leaked to the media that she did not want to be a doormat for the White House. She wanted to be running the Pentagon, basically as as a personal fiefdom or an institutional fiefdom. And so I think that a lot of the backstory for Biden's approach to China and military matters in general is he's very anxious about getting rolled by the Pentagon and getting pushed into spending and pushed into commitments and pushed into activities that he doesn't feel comfortable with. So he put in, what's his name, Austin? Put in Lloyd Austin, who's more of a Biden man and less of a Pentagon man.
Yeah, the thing I knew about Austin was that I don't know if it was because he's a general and he was following orders or whether he's just generally an honest guy, but he's the one who said in a congressional hearing that the train and equip program in Syria had produced like 5 fighters. Yeah, and answered some questions that became extremely embarrassing. Mm-hmm. I think he was dressed down for that, and I think he later changed quite a bit. But since then, he's become a revolving door general. Yeah, who has worked at Raytheon or been on their board or whatever it is they give them to buy influence.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I don't know. So it's hard to know, what this guy.
I think he's there to keep the lid on. He's there to keep the lid on. The one thing that I would say that all Democrats feel is they don't want to get into a war, with China in the next couple of years. So I see Lloyd Easton as basically trying to assert a higher level of White House control over the Pentagon, which has basically had everything its way for the last 6 years, ever since they pushed out Hagel.
Yeah, I mean, Obama started Yemen, got us out of Iraq and then back into Iraq, Syria, Libya, at least 4 wars. I think there are some more.
Yeah. Well, I like to blame Hillary Clinton for a lot of those.
And Michelle Flournoy was Hillary Clinton's girl.
Exactly.
She was a shoo-in for the Secretary of Defense job under Hillary. So
Exactly. Yeah.
presumably she felt like she would have been able to do, she wouldn't be a doormat or whatever.
Hmm. Yeah. She was going
Uh,
to wait and be Hillary's doormat. Okay.
yeah. I thought Joe Biden didn't pick Michelle Flournoy because of the uproar
Mhm.
that happened, in anticipation of her being chosen. But I didn't really hear why she didn't get that job.
Yeah. Also, it took
Exactly.
some doing to get Austin in. He had to get a waiver. And remember that I was Tammy Duckworth was saying, I'm not going to give him the waiver. You can't be an active general, like 5 years before you become a civilian secretary of defense or something like that. But that was the Flournoy crowd in there, and that took a certain amount of effort for the Biden team to smooth over.
Yeah.
Mm.
And now it's happened twice in just a few years, I guess, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have to admit, I don't sweat Lloyd Austin that much. I figure, the guys from the Navy are crazy,
They do seem, especially about China. I mean, they're the
if
ones
the
that are
Navy is
really.
allowed to do what it's going to do, it's going to get, battleships and submarines, and it's going to get a war in East Asia, because that's really where it's at for them. They figure,
Yep.
they know the Chinese are going to push them out sooner or later, unless there's some kind of war or something like that. And so those are the kind of people you want to keep the lid on the box for.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think they've gotten bored with the Middle East wars, right? There's not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's no future there, There's
who
no
wants to be
future.
stuck in the Persian Gulf, or even the Eastern Med's been a little
Yeah.
contentious lately, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So back to the summit, you mentioned that you think that this was uh, mostly for show.
Mm-hmm.
Both sides, I guess, had their
Mm-hmm.
intentions or not to be bested or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
so, and that you think that there'll be real talks without, you're saying that the real experts, which doesn't include the Secretary of State, who is supposed to be the foremost expert on
Mm-hmm.
diplomacy and negotiation and all that, but
Mm-hmm.
he didn't look very smart to me.
Yeah.
He had no response to. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that people were really surprised is when they
Mm-hmm.
dressed him down.
Mm-hmm.
They said, "Look, you got no business talking to us like
Yeah.
this. You got all your own problems, this, that, and that. You're a
Yeah.
hypocrite."
Mm-hmm.
And stop meddling in our internal affairs, which is what they always say.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
Blinken
Well,
was just kind of like, and didn't had no rebuttal.
That's what I always think about, Democratic foreign policy guys. They always have the big plan, but to quote a couple things, what did Mike Tyson say? Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. And so, it's and also the more sophisticated way of saying that is the enemy has a vote. You have this wonderful plan, what you're going to do, but you have to be prepared for the enemy to do something. Unfortunately, even when they split off into these smaller groups, I don't think there's going to be much progress on anything. The areas that the State Department have assigned or endorsed as areas of cooperation with China are things like North Korea and global warming. And I think there's some public health thing in there was the third thing. But the point is that I think that these things are not expected to succeed. So what better way to cover yourself than to be able to blame the Chinese? So that's why I think he's coming in. I don't know how closely you've been following the North Korea thing, but North Korea has always demanded denuclearization of the entire peninsula.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. And but what did the State Department go back with? They go back with denuclearization of North Korea.
Yeah.
Only. So the first thing is don't look weak, But the second thing is that then they turn around and say, China, here's a situation. Here we can work together, And they figure it's just gonna drag on for it's gonna drag on for another decade, and nothing's gonna get solved. And they have a pretext for engagement with China, but not on anything substantive. So I really see that my take is that we're just going to be marking time with the Chinese, jockeying for advantage, and hoping that nobody does something so stupid that we get into a big war.
So essentially a Cold War, which Yeah,
A lot
that
of
way you
that
could
Cold
get,
War talk going around.
yeah, a multi-dimensional Cold War this time,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, um, I think they see the Cold War as some glory days, some of the best days when you could get giant military budgets, nothing compared to what we have now.
Today, you know.
But
Yeah.
at the time, big, and you could
Mm-hmm.
have these big programs,
Mm-hmm.
and the defense contractors and the military branches can justify making the big equipment,
Mm-hmm.
which since now so much of it will be digital, it seems, you wonder about this
Well,
big
let's not forget
planes.
about the domestic angle there. You know, FBI has defined Chinese influence and espionage as the biggest threat. You know, I don't know if it's been superseded by, local white right-wing supremacists or not, but the idea is that, we're going to have to it's called an all of government effort, to
What is that? What does that speak? What does that really mean?
well, that was Christopher Wray testified that in order to protect the United States against China's influence operations and espionage operations would require an all of government effort, which means, by the way, everybody's supposed to snitch. Okay. And
Oh, so
know,
we need a Stasi or?
oh, maybe we already got one, but so we're going to do that. And also, there's all this, there was this wave of arrests against, Chinese academics who had supposedly been serving as agents for China at the same time they were receiving funding in the United States. There's a whole thing that the papers are talking about, rooting out Chinese influence at think tanks, at universities, and in media.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's, and also that's important because it brings the threat home, It's not just, they're threatening to eat the Navy's lunch out by the Marianas Trench. It's they're in the country, which is why COVID was such a godsend for the Hawks. The China threat became real. There it came.
Yeah. Well, it also harkens back to Cold War days too, right? There's Russians under every rock.
Exactly.
And the obsessions within the agencies of Russian spies and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not that there weren't really. There are. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course there
Espionage always goes on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I would probably think that, and they do say this too, that breaking into networks and things like that probably yields more than in-person spying anymore, but who knows? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's interesting because there are a lot of people who I don't think are China hawks who are saying that the risk with China is real. And that, of course, we know, well, let me just shift back just a little bit again, back to the Navy. Talk a little bit about that. I know you followed a lot, the things the Navy guys do and say, and what is it called? It used to be called PACOM, but now it's
Indo-PACOM, yeah.
That's a controversy too for some reason, right?
Indian Pacific Command. The U.S. military presence for half of the world is run out of Hawaii by Indo-Pacific Command, which used to be called Pacific Command. They're in charge of everything: land forces, Navy, Marines, Air Force, from San Diego all the way out to India. And it used to be that, their main area was responsibility for the Pacific, because they were in the Pacific Command. The main allies were the Philippines and Japan and Korea and Taiwan for a time. And so they were supposed to look after that. But when it became apparent that India was in play and India could be useful as an anti-China ally, then India and the Indian Ocean were rolled into this whole Indo-PACOM thing. And so
pretty big, now, pretty big area to cover,
It's almost literally half the world. There's basically CENTCOM, AFRICOM, and whatever we do in South America but Indo-PACOM is the biggest thing, and it is totally run by the Navy.
And why aren't they based in Japan or South Korea? Why are they based in Hawaii?
I guess Pearl Harbor, we got to stay there and fly the flag or something like that. But
It's kind of a long trip to get to your.
Well, they're making it closer. We got Guam, and we do have all those bases in Japan and Okinawa and that sort of stuff. So, they're in charge of containment of China out there. And it's Navy heavy and it's Air Force heavy. And they're always looking for more resources, they're always complaining they don't have enough ships, don't have enough submarines. And when a China hawk is in charge there, it's always talking about pushing the envelope and creating those confrontations with China that will make China look big and scary, and also convince our allies that we have their backs. So it's a very active. It's a very active command. It's a very political command, and they even handle the diplomacy. When it's time to talk about base operations or something in Japan, it's the head of PACOM who goes there. It's not the Secretary of State. So it's
Can
basically.
Can you explain that again about why that is?
Because they run the bases, and when it's time to have routine discussions about what to do about those bases, Canada and all those places, they go there and they talk to their counterparts. And they make the necessary deals. The bigger stuff, like building a new base, on Okinawa or something like that. There you have to bring in the Department of Defense. You got to bring in the Secretary of State and all that stuff. But at the lower level stuff, it's pretty much Indo-PACOM runs the show out there. They set up they generate these huge military exercises out there, and they run them and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it's just. It doesn't seem to be the case in any of the other commands. Maybe it is, and I'm just not aware of it. But maybe it was like when Petraeus was around, but...
Yeah. Well, see, the thing you have to remember is that the Navy runs in international waters. It's not like you really don't have a lot of host country issues when you're sailing ships around the Pacific,
Yeah, okay. That's fair enough.
Okay.
All right, so... Should we shift over to Taiwan?
Yeah, let's go to Taiwan.
Yeah. So that's the other, in fact, just listened to an interview today where it was an interview with retired Colonel Danny Davis. And he was saying that he was explaining a little bit about Taiwan, how far back it goes. And basically that China's position has always been that Taiwan is still part of China, and that Taiwan will be, that they will do anything that they need to do to make sure that China never declares independence, that never does anything like that. And in fact, they may use force to make, I don't even know what you want to call this, to better integrate Taiwan, to subvert. I don't even know what language.
Let's go with conquer or occupy. Yeah.
Well, they shouldn't have to occupy if it is already part of China, but just to bring them back in line, I guess you could say.
Like an kind of guy. I have a certain amount of sympathy with Taiwan independence. The place was a Japanese colony since 1895, and it was occupied by the Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, in 1949. And so they haven't had a lot of that good Chinese mainland rule going for them. And there is a separate identity out there. And with the failure of the one country, two systems thing in Hong Kong, I think between you and me, I think the PRC has pretty much given up on the idea that there's going to be some happy merger, between Taiwan and the mainland. What they would like to see is a Taiwan that is open to economic integration, infiltration, subversion, influence, whatever you want to call it, with the mainland. And that's what they had. That's what they had under the previous administration. But the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, which runs the show now over there, is basically stealth independence. Its political clout is rooted in Taiwan indigenes, and more importantly, it has decided that its future lies in first Japan, and then the United States, and turning its back on the mainland. And that is what really irritates the mainland.
Why does it irritate the mainland so much? Why can't they just say, "Oh well, let them do what they want"? Is it the fear of a NATO base on Taiwan?
Well, a military base, yeah. We've already got troops in Taiwan, and we've got a lower level military guarantee in Taiwan. And the Japanese, I think, are sort of sidestepping into a sort of a military mutual defense thing with Taiwan. They want to. So basically, the United States has always been about restoring the first island chain of containment military bases against China, Korea, Japan, Okinawa, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Nice ring, and plenty of bases and planes close there, close to attack. And they see the DPP as basically promoting that thing. Once the United States military gets its nose in the tent, it's going to be very hard to get out. They want an administration that plays the balancer role. Sometimes I tilt towards the United States, sometimes I tilt towards China, and the United States and the DPP, on the other hand, are dead set against that. In fact, if you want to look at diplomacy and strategy out in the Pacific for the last 10 years or so, it's been the war against balancers. The Chinese were trying to. They did a good job with Korea. They weaned away Korea from the U.S. Security regime, and they were working on the Philippines, and they were working on Australia, and that's really what the United States pushed back on. They forced the Australians, or I should say the Australian military and security establishment, forced the civilian governments there to go into a confrontational China mode. So
that's really just within the past 5 years or so, right?
Well, let me think. It started actually. It started in the Obama years, and it was when the port of Darwin was a facility there was leased to a Chinese company, and the Americans decided to go apeshit over that, and that started a whole thing of the ambassador, saying to the local Australians, you can't do this. So that was where the whole pushback thing. And then there was this orchestrated thing against Chinese influence, going after them in media, refusing Chinese investment and all that sort of stuff. So again, the whole idea was that to push the debate off of economic terms, which are good for China because it's rich in Asia and does a lot of things, onto security terms. And that was supposed to keep the balancers from balancing. Instead of having security issues that are pro-US and economic issues that are pro-China, we've decoupled. And now the discourse of particularly Australia with China is largely security-based.
Yeah, I'm only in close touch with a couple of people in Australia, but my impression is that train has left the station. The Chinese already own an awful lot.
They own it all down there
of Australia, but that's just from a couple of sources, so I can't verify that.
No. I think the Chinese were hoping that would be the case, that they'd own everything, and the Australian government would distance itself from, the U.S. military, but
it would make logical sense based on their placement.
They're an island about the U.S. nation. Presence in Asia makes logical sense,
Yeah, well, yeah. But they speak English, so they have to. And they're Five Eyes, so they have to be.
Oh yeah, well, the Five Eyes have really emerged as the key marker, because the whole thing about Huawei internationally, the only reason that worked was because for Five Eyes, the NSA threatened to cut off intelligence sharing if there was Huawei equipment there, and then the whole idea of Chinese influence penetrating into these countries was very much a narrative that was peddled by the local security administration. So the Five Eyes all move in lockstep there. Even if the local governments think differently, the Five Eyes GCHQ and all those, and the Australian Signals Directorate and all those guys, they follow the United States in lockstep. And so they're.
Hey, it must be a good gig, that Five Eyes thing, Peter. I don't know.
Have you ever seen a picture of GCHQ? I mean, it's a gigantic flying saucer out in the middle of the country there. Yeah.
Must be a good gig and some juicy intelligence comes along with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So lastly, on Taiwan,
Mm-hmm.
Davis was saying that it would not surprise him at all. He said for a number of reasons, things aren't getting better
Mm-hmm.
in terms of China's prospects for bringing Taiwan back into the fold. That as time goes on, the generations grow up not having many connections with or identifying much with the Chinese mainland, and I guess other reasons, and that they're starting to see it as more and more of an urgent issue, and one of those sort of, if we don't do it now, it's only going to be harder or worse later. And he thinks that they're serious about starting a war with Taiwan.
I disagree.
You do.
I do. I'm glad the big thing about the big thing for the U.S. Navy is saying they're going to invade. We need more shit.
Yeah.
Right now, basically the do you know Project 2049?
No.
You should. No, Project 2049 is the premier Taiwan independence think tank in Washington, D.C. And it's funded by Japanese and Taiwanese peoples and American arms dealers and that sort of thing. And the current head of it is Randy Shriver, who was the I can't remember his exact title, but he was like a head of strategic planning for Asia in the Pentagon. Good old Randy. So anyway, the reason it's called Project 2049, they never say this out loud, but the idea is that China must be destroyed. The CCP must be destroyed by its 100th anniversary. Otherwise, it's game over. So, all this talk about how they got to do something now is, I think, bullshit. The longer this goes on, the weaker the United States comes in Asia, the more dominant China becomes as it's building aircraft carrier strike groups out the yazoo, the less likely it is that Taiwan is going to want to confront China. And their hope, they play the long game, and they're thinking, in 10 years, 15 years, people are going to be saying, well, this cooperation with the United States, what's it getting us? It's time to go at Nixon to China. Madam X goes to China, that sort of thing. So, I just laugh when I'm sorry, I shouldn't say this about Colonel Davis. When I hear this thing about
actually he
China.
did, I don't want to misrepresent him. He did mention that one of the options was that what China's hoping is that Taiwan is just going to say this just isn't worth it. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of along the lines of what you're saying right now. So
and on the other hand, the independence types and the U.S. military are more interested in forcing the issue early before China is stronger. And so, certainly under Trump, they love Trump over there. Do you know there was actually a headline when Trump was losing, or lost or got the less votes on election night? There was this headline in a Taiwan paper. It says, President Tsai, that's the president of Taiwan, tells people not to panic over Trump vote. Because, he was seen as their great protector.
I see.
Sort of stuff. The champion of this new relationship, which sort of stealth independence thing. So, the reason I'm happy that Lloyd Easton is running the Pentagon is because I think that if things had gone in the Trumpward direction, some nut job would have said, okay, let's roll the dice. Let's declare independence and assume that the Chinese are going to knuckle under, But I don't think that's going to happen. People talk about invading Taiwan. That's not the only option. The other option is they just fire a few dozen missiles and the economy collapses and everybody flees, So,
100 miles, is it? 100 miles off the mainland Chinese coast?
Yeah, it's pretty close. I don't remember the exact thing, but a couple of days ago, the Chinese did this thing where they said, we're not just going to fly towards Taiwan on this side, we're going to fly around the other side. So they did this little loop around the southern side of the island to show that they could be firing missiles and dropping bombs from the backside. And of course, all the air defenses pointed that way.
They cut all the defense pointed this way. They just come right. Oh my God.
Sort of like the guns at Singapore, they're all pointed the wrong way. So, I'm optimistic that, with Biden, laser focused on the domestic issues and not wanting a China war to mess up the midterms, and Lloyd Easton in command at the Pentagon, that's my dream team there. They're just going to say, relax, Taiwan, relax, just let this thing play out. And, the guys at, in the Navy are going to say, but we got to start a war now, otherwise the Chinese will have 2 more carrier strike groups on the water, and we won't be able to do anything. As I say, don't worry, we'll talk to the Chinese.
Austin was Army general, right?
Yeah, Austin's
not
an
Marines.
Army guy. Yeah,
Army.
He's an old dirt guy out of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to roll into the bonus question, I think. So in another different interview, and it's come up, I've heard it a lot of times, all this time, when people say the argument that was the discussion that was being had, and the argument that was being made was that they were saying that the war in Afghanistan reminds them of the war in Vietnam in some ways. And one of those ways is that one of the reasons why the war in Vietnam was prolonged was because nobody wanted to take blame for losing it. Mm-hmm. And that's a similar thing in Afghanistan. And they talk about the who lost China meme or whatever. Just mm-hmm. that this is like a matter of pride, stubbornness, or it was back in the, I don't know which decades it was active. Mm-hmm. I guess, all the way up to the 1970s. They didn't want to be blamed. The question of who lost China was always thrown out there. No one wanted to be blamed for that. And I realized that, I kind of get it, but I don't really know exactly what that means. What are the roots of that? And what does it actually mean? The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some of you will join us. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up. Okay, well, let's roll back into the public part, the main part of the interview. And if you would, any final words?
Oh, okay.
Any final words, please do. And then make sure you tell everybody how to follow your work, how to support your work.
Okay. Yeah, so, well, my position as far as the Biden administration is concerned is one of cautious optimism because of their basic commitment to inaction and sloth. So, Biden being his team, I think, is laser focused on the midterms, on at the same time not looking weak on foreign policy, and I think that translates into a lot of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. And after the midterms, well, it's anybody's guess. And maybe by that time we'll have President Kamala Harris, and she might have some different ideas. I welcome you to subscribe to my Patreon, which is a audio podcast and also a written blog, which is called Peter Lee's China Threat Report. And if you can't come up with the money to follow my Patreon, you're always welcome to follow me on Twitter at China Hand on Twitter. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Peter. Great talking to you again.
Adios. Zai Jian.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Peter Lee. Follow Peter on Twitter at ChinaHand and subscribe to the Peter Lee's China Threat Report on Patreon. This podcast is independent media, listener support, very important. Rockfin.com/Around the Empire, Patreon.com/Around the Empire, or PayPal.me/Around the Empire Pod. Find the podcast on any mobile podcast app, on the website aroundtheempire.com, on Rockfin, Patreon, or on YouTube. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. And there are still even some more platforms coming that I'll let you know about soon. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.